Thane Ryder had survived asteroid mining, ship malfunctions, and even a brief stint as a prisoner of space pirates. Nothing in his career prepared him for the day he was assigned to babysit a tiny alien girl who thought his socket wrench was a reproduction device. The station commander had been crystal clear during the briefing. Cultural exchange programs were vital for maintaining peace across the galaxy. Thane would share his quarters with Vesper, an ambassador from the distant planet Celestra, for 6 standard months. Simple enough, he thought. Keep things professional, avoid diplomatic incidents, and maybe learn something about alien culture. What the commander failed to mention was that Vesper stood barely 4 feet tall, had luminous purple skin that seemed to shimmer in low light, and possessed the innocent curiosity of someone who had never encountered human customs before. She arrived at his door with a single travel case and eyes so wide they could have swallowed stars. Her voice came out in melodic chirps that his translator struggled to process at first. "You are Thane Ryder, the human male who will teach me your species ways." Her gaze swept over his quarters with intense fascination. "This dwelling is adequate for reproduction purposes." "Yes, very adequate." Thane nearly dropped the coffee mug he was holding. Reproduction purposes. Right. This was going to be interesting. He cleared his throat and gestured to the spare bunk across the room. "That is your sleeping area. My area is over here. We maintain separate spaces for privacy and comfort." Vesper tilted her head like a confused bird. Separate. But the cultural database said humans pair bond for survival and emotional stability. Are we not pairing? Her translator seemed to hiccup on the word, replacing it with something that sounded uncomfortably close to mating. Thane felt heat creep up his neck. "We are roommates, colleagues, not anything that involves reproduction." He emphasized the last word, hoping his translator would make it abundantly clear. She nodded slowly, but the confusion never left her face. "I understand. This is the preliminary phase. The courtship must proceed according to proper human ritual." Before Thane could correct her assumption, she had already begun unpacking. From her small case, she produced clothing that looked like it was woven from liquid starlight, a few personal items, and a tattered burnt magazine that looked like it had survived an explosion. She held it up with reverence that made Thane immediately suspicious. "I was gifted this sacred text by the departing human diplomat. It contains all the wisdom of human bonding customs. I have studied it thoroughly during my journey here." Thane stepped closer to get a better look at what she was holding. His blood went cold. It was not a diplomatic manual. It was not a cultural guide. It was a cheap dating magazine from about 15 years ago, the kind sold at spaceport kiosks with glossy covers and trashy advice columns. Half of it was scorched beyond recognition. The other half featured titles like 10 Ways to Make Him Yours and The Ultimate Guide to Seduction. Where exactly did you get that? His voice came out strangled. Vesper clutched it to her chest protectively. The previous ambassador said it was essential reading for understanding human intimacy protocols. I have memorized every page that survived the unfortunate cargo bay fire. She opened it carefully and pointed to a partially burnt section. "See here. It explains the sacred ritual of Netflix and chill, a ceremonial exchange of frozen water and shared warmth to establish trust between potential mates." Thane rubbed his face with both hands. "That is not what that means. That is not a sacred anything. That is garbage entertainment written by people who do not know what they are talking about." Vesper looked genuinely hurt. "You mock the sacred text. Perhaps you are not ready for the bonding rituals." "I must study harder to prove myself worthy." She spent the rest of that first evening cross-legged on her bunk, reading the charred magazine like it contained the meaning of existence. Thane tried to work on his maintenance reports, but found himself distracted by the way she whispered to herself, practicing phrases like "play hard to get" and "dress to impress." Every few minutes, she would glance up at him with an expression of intense concentration, as if calculating complex equations in her head. The next morning, Thane woke to find his quarters transformed. Vesper had rearranged the furniture, dimmed the lights to what she probably thought was romantic, and placed small bowls of colorful Celestran flowers around the room. She stood in the center, wearing what appeared to be her attempt at human casual clothing. She had wrapped herself in one of his spare sheets, like a toga, and tied it with his tool belt. Her hair, which normally flowed loose down her back, had been braided with spare electrical wire. "Good morning, Thane Ryder. I have prepared the environment for optimal bonding, according to Chapter 3 of the Sacred Manual." She gestured around proudly. "Do you find this aesthetically pleasing? Does it increase your reproductive interest?" Thane sat up slowly, trying to process what he was seeing. "You do not need to do any of this. We are just living together, working together. Nothing else." But Vesper was already consulting her magazine again, flipping through pages with frantic determination. Step 1. Establish common ground through shared activities. She looked up at him with blazing intensity. "We must engage in shared activities immediately." "What kind of activities?" Thane asked cautiously. "The manual suggests watching entertainment media together and consuming cold refreshments. This creates emotional vulnerability that facilitates deeper connection." Thane wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that she was taking dating advice from a magazine that probably got its information from sitcoms and bad romance novels. But there was something in her expression that stopped him. Beneath all the absurdity and misunderstanding, she genuinely wanted to connect. She was alone on a strange station, surrounded by beings who did not speak her language or understand her culture. And she was trying desperately to build a bridge using the only information she had. Fine. He sighed. "We can watch something together. But no cold refreshments. Normal temperature beverages only." Vesper lit up like he had just agreed to marry her. "Excellent. I will prepare the ritual space." She disappeared into the small kitchen area and returned with a bucket. An actual bucket filled with ice cubes she must have raided from the station commissary. Before Thane could stop her, she dumped the entire contents onto his bunk, spreading them across the mattress in what she clearly believed was an even ceremonial pattern. "The chill ritual is essential," she said seriously. "It represents the balance between cold external circumstances and warm internal feelings. Very symbolic. Very important for human pair bonding." Thane stared at his now frozen bed. "You have created a glacier in my sleeping area. How is this romantic? The manual is very specific." She held up the magazine and pointed to a section Thane could barely read. "See, Netflix and chill. The cold is fundamental to the process. That is not." He stopped himself. Explaining modern slang to an alien who thought duct tape was a sex toy was going to take more energy than he had. "Fine. Let us do the chill ritual." He climbed onto the icy bed, teeth immediately chattering as freezing water soaked through his pants. Vesper settled beside him with a satisfied expression and activated the wall screen. Instead of accessing the station entertainment library, she pulled up what appeared to be Celestran meditation frequencies. Deep rhythmic tones that sounded like whale songs mixed with industrial machinery filled the room. "Is this not soothing?" She asked if by soothing you mean deeply unsettling, then yes. "Absolutely." She nodded happily and reached over to take his hand. Her fingers were surprisingly warm, despite her tiny frame. "The manual says physical contact during the chill ritual accelerates the bonding process. I am now accelerating our bond." Thane looked down at their joined hands, at the tiny alien girl sitting beside him on a frozen mattress, while cosmic whale noises played in the background. And he realized with creeping horror that this was only day 2. He had 6 months of this ahead of him. 6 months of misinterpreted dating advice, bizarre rituals, and increasingly creative interpretations of human romance. Vesper squeezed his hand gently and smiled up at him with such genuine hope that something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. Maybe it would not be so terrible. Maybe beneath all the chaos and confusion, there was something real trying to emerge. Something that had nothing to do with magazines or manuals or rituals. Or maybe he was just hypothermic and losing his ability to think clearly. Either way, he squeezed her hand back and settled in for whatever disaster came next. The ice cube incident should have been a warning sign, but Thane underestimated Vesper's dedication to her sacred manual. By the end of the first week, his quarters looked like a combination between a romantic restaurant explosion and a hardware store clearance sale. The tiny alien girl had interpreted every piece of dating advice with the literal enthusiasm of a scientist following lab protocols. It started with the candles. Thane came back from his shift in the engineering bay to find 27 candles arranged in a perfect circle around his bunk. Not the safe electric kind. Real wax candles with actual flames that flickered dangerously close to the station ventilation system. Vesper stood in the center of the circle wearing nothing but his spare work jacket, which hung off her small frame like a tent. The manual says candlelight increases romantic atmosphere by 73%. She announced with the confidence of someone citing peer-reviewed research. I have calculated optimal placement for maximum effect. Do you feel the romance? Is it increasing? Thane quickly moved to extinguish several candles that were seconds away from triggering the fire suppression system. I feel terror mostly. Also concerned for station safety regulations. Vesper frowned and consulted her burnt magazine. Perhaps I miscalculated. She flipped through pages, covered in her own handwritten notes. The text mentions setting the mood, but does not specify exact temperature requirements. Should I increase the flame intensity? Absolutely not. Thane grabbed the magazine from her hands, intending to throw it out the airlock. But Vesper let out a sound of genuine distress that made him pause. Please. That is all I have to understand your ways. Without it, I am lost. I do not know how to make you want me. Her voice cracked on the last words, and her luminous eyes suddenly looked glassy. Thane felt something twist in his gut. He handed the magazine back carefully. You do not need this to make me want to spend time with you. We are already spending time together. That is enough, but the manual says humans require elaborate courtship displays. Females must prove their value through seduction techniques and strategic behavior modification. She pointed to a section titled, Make Him Chase. I must become irresistible through calculated emotional distance. Before Thane could respond, Vesper bolted from the room and wedged herself under his workbench in the corner. She refused to come out, despite his increasingly desperate attempts to coax her. According to her interpretation of playing hard to get, she needed to remain physically inaccessible until he demonstrated sufficient pursuit effort. Vesper, you cannot live under my workbench. That is not how human courtship works. Her voice echoed from beneath the metal bench. The manual is clear. Males value what they must work to obtain. I am now valuable because you cannot reach me. This will increase your desire exponentially. Thane sat on the floor next to the workbench. If I bring you food, will you come out? Food is an excellent courtship offering. Yes, I will accept your tribute. He grabbed a ration bar from his emergency supplies and slid it under the bench. A small purple hand snatched it immediately. He heard contented chewing sounds followed by more page flipping. The next step. She crawled out from under the bench with the magazine held up triumphantly. Role-play scenarios. The manual says humans enjoy pretending to be different personas to add excitement to encounters. I must select an appropriate character. Thane had a very bad feeling about where this was going. Maybe we should skip that section. Too late. Vesper had already disappeared into the sleeping area. When she emerged 15 minutes later, Thane genuinely questioned his sanity. She had somehow acquired a full security officer uniform, complete with mock weapon and communications badge. Her hair was slicked back severely, and she had drawn lines on her face with what looked like maintenance marker. Identify yourself civilian. She barked in the most aggressive tone her melodic voice could manage. You are under suspicion of unauthorized romantic activity. I must interrogate you immediately. She marched over and shoved him backward onto his bunk. Before he could react, she was straddling his waist with a toy weapon pointed at his chest. Her face was inches from his, eyes narrowed in what she clearly thought was an intimidating glare. Confess your crimes. Do you or do you not harbor romantic intentions toward this officer? Lying will result in severe penalties. Thane tried desperately not to laugh. This is not what role-play means in the context you are thinking. Silence. She pressed the weapon harder against his chest. The manual says role-play adds thrilling power dynamics to intimate encounters. I am now the dominant authority figure. You are the helpless suspect. This creates sexual tension. Where exactly does it say at page 17? She held up the magazine with her free hand. See. Cops and Robbers Scenario. Highly recommended for advanced practitioners. That is about costumes and fantasy, not actual interrogation tactics. You are supposed to be playful, not genuinely threatening. Vesper leaned closer, her breath warm against his face. I am being playful. This is my playful interrogation face. Am I not intimidating? Does it not make your heart race with forbidden excitement? That my heart is racing because a tiny alien girl is sitting on me with a fake gun. That is anxiety, not excitement. She sat back, looking deflated. The manual promised this would work. Perhaps I need more realistic props. She glanced toward his actual tool collection. The plasma cutter might add authenticity. No plasma cutters. No real weapons. No anything that can cause actual harm. Thane sat up carefully, forcing her to shift her position. Look, the manual is written for humans who already understand the context. You cannot just follow it literally. Then teach me. She grabbed his shirt with both hands, her small frame trembling slightly. Teach me the context. Teach me what humans want. I do not understand the rules, and I am afraid of doing everything wrong. I am afraid you will reject me, because I am too different, too small, too alien. The vulnerability in her voice cut through all the absurdity. Thane realized she was not just following a manual. She was terrified. Terrified of being alone, of failing her mission, of not being good enough. The burnt magazine was her security blanket, her only connection to understanding the human she was stuck with. He reached up and gently removed the fake weapon from her hands. You are not doing everything wrong. You are just doing things very literally. Human dating advice is written in metaphors and cultural context. When it says spice things up, it does not mean actual cooking spices. Vesper looked confused. But I already tried the spices. You said you felt like taco night. That seemed positive, because I was covered in chili powder and cumin. Thane could not help but laugh at the memory. You dumped half the commissary spice rack on me. The manual said add spice for excitement. I was adding excitement chemically. Was that incorrect? Spice is a metaphor. It means try something new or unexpected, not literal seasoning. Vesper processed this information carefully. So when it says dress to kill, I should not acquire weapons. Correct. That means wear something attractive, not something deadly. And when it says blow his mind, also a metaphor, means impress him. Not actual cranial explosion. Humans are very confusing. Why do you say things you do not mean? Vesper climbed off him and sat cross-legged on the bunk, magazine open across her lap. Every instruction is false. How does anyone successfully mate with all these secret meanings? Thane sat beside her and gently closed the magazine. Real human connection is not about following steps. It is about spending time together, learning about each other, and letting things develop naturally. You do not need tricks or techniques. You just need to be yourself. Vesper looked at him with those wide, luminous eyes. But myself does not know human customs. Myself makes you sleep on ice and covers you in spices. Myself thinks duct tape is romantic accessory. How is that adequate? It is adequate because it is genuine. Thane found himself reaching over to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. You are trying so hard to be what you think I want that you are not letting me see who you actually are. I would rather know the real Vesper than watch you perform some magazine version of romance. She was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. Then what should I do? If not follow the manual, what is the correct procedure? There is no procedure. Just talk to me. Tell me about your planet. Tell me what you like and what scares you. Let me tell you about myself. That is how humans really connect. Vesper nodded slowly. So the sacred manual is incorrect. The sacred manual is garbage written by people trying to sell magazines. Thane tossed it aside. From now on, we create our own manual. One that actually makes sense for both of us. For the first time since arriving, Vesper smiled without consulting instructions. I would like that. But can we keep some of the candles? I do enjoy the flickering light. It reminds me of our stellar aurora back home. We can keep the candles. But we are getting electric ones that will not burn down the station. That seems reasonable. She leaned against his shoulder tentatively. Is this allowed in the new manual? Physical closeness without ice or spices. That is absolutely allowed. Encouraged even. They sat together in comfortable silence while the station hummed around them. Thane realized that somewhere between the disasters and the laughter, he had stopped seeing Vesper as an assignment. She was becoming something more. Something he did not have a manual for either. And that made it terrifying and exciting. In equal measure, 3 weeks into their cohabitation, Thane discovered that abandoning the burnt magazine did not mean abandoning chaos. Vesper simply redirected her intense focus from following scripted advice to conducting what she called cultural research experiments. This somehow proved even more dangerous than the original manual. She started by testing human food preferences. Thane came back from a maintenance shift to find his quarters filled with smoke and a very determined, tiny alien girl standing over a cooking unit that was producing sounds no appliance should make. She had attempted to create something called romantic dinner based on description from the station database. I have prepared sustenance to demonstrate my capacity for domestic partnership. She presented him with a plate containing what might have once been protein rations, before being subjected to temperatures normally reserved for welding metal. The sauce appears to have achieved sentience, but I'm assured this is normal for human cuisine. Thane looked at the bubbling, hissing mass on his plate. What exactly were you trying to make? The database said humans enjoy surf and turf. I interpreted this as ocean creature combined with ground-covering vegetation. She pointed proudly at her creation. I obtained kelp from the hydroponics bay and mixed it with the artificial grass from the recreation deck. Very authentic. That is not what those words mean. Also, we should evacuate before whatever is on this plate evolves into a higher life form. But I worked very hard. Vesper looked genuinely crushed. I wanted to provide for you the way the manual said females should. Demonstrate value through domestic skills. Thane set the plate down carefully, making sure it was not near anything flammable. You do not need to demonstrate value. You already have value just by existing. That is not something you earn through cooking or following instructions. Then what do? Her voice came out small and frustrated. Every attempt to connect with you fails. Every human custom I try to learn becomes disaster. Perhaps I am simply incompatible with your species. Perhaps this assignment was a mistake from the beginning. She turned away, but not before Thane saw moisture gathering in her eyes. Celestrans did not cry the way humans did, but their emotional distress manifested as a soft glow beneath their skin. Vesper was practically luminescent. Hey. He moved closer and gently turned her to face him. The disasters are not failures. They are just learning experiences with more property damage than usual. You mock me even now. I am not mocking. I am saying that connection is messy. It does not follow neat steps. It happens in the mistakes and the laughter and the weird burned kelp moments. But I do not understand human bonding. Vesper wiped at her eyes. On Celestra, we have clear protocols. Genetic compatibility is measured, social standing is evaluated, family lineages are merged through formal ceremony. Everything has structure and purpose. Here, humans talk about falling in love like it is something that happens by accident. How can something so important be so random? Maybe that is what makes it important. Thane found himself sitting on the floor, pulling her down beside him. If it was just protocol and measurement, it would not mean anything. The fact that it is random and unpredictable, and sometimes involves sleeping on ice, makes it real. Vesper leaned against him, her small frame fitting perfectly under his arm. I am afraid I will never understand. I am afraid I will remain forever confused by metaphors and slang and why humans say the opposite of what they mean. Join the club. Most humans do not understand it either. We are all just making educated guesses and hoping for the best. That is terrifying. She looked up at him. How does your species survive with so much uncertainty? We find people who make the uncertainty feel less scary. Thane realized his hand had somehow found its way to her hair, fingers running through the silky strands. People who make the disasters funny instead of tragic. People who try to cook kelp and grass because they care enough to make the effort, even when they have no idea what they are doing. Are you saying my terrible cooking was somehow endearing? I am saying it was definitely memorable. And kind of sweet in a potentially toxic way. Vesper laughed. It was the first real laugh he had heard from her. Not the polite diplomatic sound she made during station meetings, but something genuine and unguarded. It sounded like wind chimes and distant thunder combined. The station lights flickered through their scheduled evening dimming cycle. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled slowly through the black. Inside the quarters, two beings from completely different worlds sat on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of their collective disasters. Burnt magazines still visible under the workbench. Electric candles now arranged safely on shelves. A plate of sentient kelp slowly cooling on the counter. Can I tell you something? Vesper spoke quietly. Something I have not told anyone since arriving on this station. Of course, I volunteered for this assignment. She picked at a loose thread on his sleeve. The cultural exchange program asked for candidates, and everyone on my world thought it was punishment posting. Forced to live with aliens, learning strange customs, being away from home for an entire solar cycle. But I wanted to come. I wanted to see what else was out there besides protocols and genetic measurements and predetermined life paths. That was brave. That was terrifying. Still is terrifying. She looked up at him with those luminous eyes. But less terrifying than it was before. Before I had only burnt magazine and assumptions. Now I have someone who laughs at my disasters instead of reporting them as diplomatic incidents. I would never report your disasters. They are our disasters now. Thane pulled her closer. Besides, I am the one who let you believe duct tape was a romantic accessory. I am complicit in these crimes. We are both terrible at this. Vesper said, The worst. Thane agreed. So what do we do now? I think we just keep being terrible together until we figure out our own way of doing things. No manuals, no protocols, no predetermined paths. Just two idiots trying not to burn down a space station. Vesper was quiet for a moment. Then she shifted position, moving to face him directly. Her hands came up to frame his face, her touch gentle and questioning. Is this allowed in our custom manual? The one we are creating together. What is this? I believe humans call it a kiss. I have been wanting to try it since I arrived, but the burnt magazine said I needed to complete 17 preparatory steps first. Since we have abandoned the magazine, perhaps we can skip directly to this part. Thane felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. That sounds like an excellent plan. She leaned in slowly, giving him every opportunity to pull away. He did not pull away. When her lips met his, it was gentle and curious, and nothing like any kiss he had experienced before. She tasted like ozone and starlight and possibilities. Her skin was warm where it touched his, that inner luminescence pulsing softly beneath the surface. When they finally broke apart, Vesper had a dazed expression. The manual did not adequately explain that sensation. I believe I need additional research data. Multiple trials for scientific accuracy. For science. Thane murmured against her lips. Definitely for science. She kissed him again, less hesitant this time. Her small hands gripped his shirt, like she was afraid he might disappear. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her easily into his lap. She made a small sound of surprise that turned into something closer to contentment. They stayed like that as the stars turned overhead. No ice cubes, no interrogation scenarios, no plasma cutters or spices, or any of the absurd things Vesper had tried before. Just two beings learning each other's rhythms, finding connection in the spaces between words. Eventually they moved to the bunk, still tangled together. Vesper curled against his chest, her breathing evening out into sleep. Thane lay awake a while longer, staring at the ceiling and trying to process how his simple assignment had become something infinitely more complicated, somewhere in the chaos of burnt magazines and cultural misunderstandings. He had fallen for the tiny alien girl who thought duct tape was romantic. It was not what he expected. It was not what either of them planned. But it was real and messy, and perfectly imperfect, just like the manual they were writing together. One disaster at a time.